That is a quick summary, particularly for anybody who's just walked in at halfway through. I think we had Richard at the beginning talking about principles to practices, and he talked about different phases of requirement to do this. Firstly through the measurement phase, then the quantification, then to analyze, and then from the output of the analysis to build a strategy. So I think that the key word that we've been listening to this afternoon, which came at this strategy point, was around design. So Richard was offering to us that we had to design for sustainability. So we moved on to listening to Duncan Baker-Brown, saying that, first of all, this keyword again, design. Designers can save planet Earth. He summed up with sort of a recycle, reuse, reduce, and closed loop model, and gave us some state-of-the-art examples, training shoes and football kit, popular items out there, and other slightly left field things like chewing gum, reusing stations, and so on. He offered to us that deconstruction was a science, and I think we're talking about the built environment and the design for that, but I think we also need to talk about how do we design buildings for deconstruction as well as for the initial installation. So again, the key word was around design, getting in at the beginning and setting your stall out to do that. He said, and his last point was around designing for reuse rather than just designing for installation and use. We had Charlie talking about practical construction considerations, trying to move away from this take, make, and dispose model. Some examples around what felt good in terms of the volume of material that was recovered in the construction industry, but turned out to be not so strong because a lot of it was just being burnt for energy. Better than nothing, better than landfill, but certainly not the developed and developed circular construction model that he then went on to offer. So again, he talked about design. There was a production cycle, but an in-use cycle. And the in-use cycle required its own design and consideration. I think he offered us some good case studies. He then summed up by talking about designing for space, designing for products, and designing a new flexible business model. So the key word again was design. Jon finished the session off talking about the transformation to the sustainable built environment and flexible life buildings, but it was reviewing of barriers to use, and he was talking about we have to design around the available stock. We have to design to overcome barriers and design to overcome the technical issues. A systematic change was offered that he said, that we want a new business model. And strangely for me, offered that perhaps central government wouldn't drive this. They haven't picked up on it yet, or don't see the political gain that could be made from driving for that. What he wanted to hook into was client demand, get a critical mass of people who understood the principles and would then force that design to take place. So that's my 5-minute summary of what I think we heard. I'd like to thank you for listening, but also now invite you to address any of our esteemed speakers here today, challenge them or reiterate their points. And yes, in the front row, you're the first to show, so if you just wait for the microphone, please. And can I ask to say who you are and who you're directing the question to, please? Try again. Just hold on a minute, David. We're not connecting. We'll try the second microphone. Cliff Richard never had this problem.
I'll try again. Is that better?
That sounds better. Thank you.
My name is David Lowry. I'm a research consultant and writer on sustainable issues. I have a high-level question and a short, low-level question. The high-level question is, how can the indicators used for calculating a national GDP be changed so that the benefits of a circular economy can be seen in the progress of the country? And the other question is a more technical one. Can any of the panelists comment on whether or not they feel there's an opportunity for any circular economy adaptation in the nuclear energy industry, where the waste products tend to be very difficult to segregate out, and the recycling possibilities at the moment seem to be limited?
Would you like to address that to anybody in particular, or
well,
to
I
whoever
don't know
feels
who the
brave
expert
enough?
might be on any of those things, so let them answer as they feel like it.
Gents? I think the first question was around the GDP, and the second question was around specifics around the nuclear industry and that ways. Duncan?
Yeah, can everybody hear me? Yeah. The issue about GDP has been identified by the EU with a circular economy package that was issued in December 2015. And I haven't got the figures off the top of my head, but the reason they published, or one of the reasons they published this document was because they identified the amount of employment that would be generated by a circular economy, as well as the amount of wealth. So for me, it's a relatively easy sell to, if you're not paying, as a company, if you're not paying for so much raw materials and you're not paying a tax for throwing stuff away, you're going to probably be, if you can keep in the middle and keep a circular system going, you're going to be earning more money. And I mean, I'm in maybe a particularly small niche group at the moment, but I've seen plenty of examples of businesses at a small, medium and larger scale who are making money out of this idea of a closed-loop circular economy. So for me, it's a no-brainer.
I think I would just add that I mentioned as an example that one of the key things that's been identified that would drive the systemic change to a circular economy is shifting the tax burden, not increasing or decreasing the tax burden, but shifting it from labour, where it's primarily residing at the minute, and onto materials and resources. And Professor Walter Stahl, who is sort of the originator of a lot of these ideas, was speaking just before lunchtime on one of the other stages, is the originator of that idea, his idea of a performance economy that's based on the use and availability and access to resources rather than their ownership and consumption. I think that's a really key point for that systemic change.
Okay. You happy with that answer, or is it a little generic? That's okay, fine. And does anybody feel brave enough to answer the nuclear question? I think that's a society question.
Not a nuclear expert, apologies.
I don't think they're backing out. I think they're lacking in particularly in the exact experience of the nuclear industry to take that on. So we'll go to the back of the room. The gentleman there, if you'd like to stand and ask the question and tell us who you are.
Thank you, Martin Fodor.
Martin.
In a way, it's a slightly sort of a provocative question. The buildings that have been most reused and most adaptable are the ones that are really traditional and basic old-fashioned buildings. What would be your guidance for people in terms of newer buildings? Because we're getting things like off-site modular construction, multi-materials, things designed for single use, which appears to be taking it in the opposite direction. Should we be going back to much more traditional basic buildings? I mean, we have more complicated buildings now, but the single-use modules are probably, as a unit, can be taken away, but the components and the materials, I fear, can't be. Am I right or am I wrong?
Oh, is he right or is he wrong? Charlie?
Well, I better start on that one. Yeah, I think you're right. There are some advantages of old traditional materials, and I think we need to be looking still at bricks and stuff like that as coatings. But I think we need to change the way that we're using them at the moment. You know, at the moment we're laying bricks in cement mortar. We need to come up with new ways of doing that, so they may be recovered in the future. In housing, I've stayed away from housing in my presentation because housing is generally a long life product. It doesn't really fit into the circular economy model, or it does, because it's used for such a long time, and there's houses that are built 400 years ago that are still standing now. So housing, we need to think about buildings that are turned over quite often. We mentioned retail, we mentioned office buildings in our presentations. And those materials, there are new materials that are coming online, and I think some of the examples are actually on the Bambi building outside here. Things like demountable cladding panels that can be clipped on or off. So if the fashion changes and someone wants to change their mind, change the colour of their building, they can almost clip them off, they can be sold on, and new ones put in their place, or a new totally new facade. So I think, you know, the way we build buildings now with a structure that's then covered in a skin, that skin can be changed as many times and as often as you like.
Okay, thank you. Now, John, you talked about the need to design a new business model. Our question there was sort of challenging that we're still running with the current model. I'm sure you'd have something to say on this matter.
So I think you're actually right. It's horses for courses. So, you know, long life buildings, long life loose fit, if it's going to last for 150 years, it's not going to be the same for 150 years, even if it's a house. You know, people reconfigure them over the time, so the same principles apply. It's just what you're going to change. You may not change the basic structure and the outside skin of the building, but the internal walls and the layout are probably going to change over the lifetime of the building anyway. So long life loose fit, or if you know it's going to have a short design life, And I thought Charlie's presentation of breaking down the design life of the different component parts was very useful. You know, design for that design life of those bits. But horses for courses, not everything needs to be 3 years dismantled and moved at all. Long life loose fit or short term and reusable in my book.
Duncan, did you want to add?
Yeah, can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay. I construct buildings as well, and I've done university buildings with brick, with lime mortar. So those buildings are material stores for the future. I agree with John, it's horses for courses, but I also think it's behaviour change we've got to look at as well, because the slide I showed, which showed the really big, ugly glass building in Brussels, that is being dismantled and reused. So I just think it's about habits and proving the economic model works. And these people that are doing that, they're making money. They're making money for their clients as well as themselves. So I think it's about changing behaviour more than anything else. I mean, silicon and the spray foam stuff, the stuff that gets you to passive house standards sometimes, gets you air-tight buildings, that is a big challenge for people dismantling buildings in the early 21st century.
Thank you. Richard, very quick word.
I think that point about simple, flexible buildings is the right one. I think we overcomplicate and we design very much for the present day. I think the design process and the economic analysis of built environment assets is very much fixed in one moment in time, and we don't sufficiently consider how buildings change. And I think a lot of the traditional techniques, we're better at doing that than we are at the minute.
Thank you. So, good question there. I think we got interaction from everybody on the panel. There was one or two other hands up. Anybody else still wants to ask a question? We've got a few more minutes to go. Yes, please, if you just wait for the microphone.
Hi, my name's Charlotte Booth from Hodkinson Consultancy. We're an energy and environmental consultancy in the built environment. I really had a question about, John, you mentioned there's no sort of central government drive at the moment to stimulate the circular economy. But under the draft London plan, there's a new policy, SI7, which looks to or proposes to ask for circular economy statements to be submitted as part of planning applications. Do you think that will help drive this agenda, and what do you think those statements will look like? It seems a bit woolly at the moment.
Okay, so the latter part of the question, what they look like, that's quite tricky. But I do think the policy drive from London will certainly help. And in fact, one of the partners that we're working with on building that group of clients is the GLA. And they, I have to be careful how I say this, they'll be helping us identify clients that will commit to take that forward. So the policy drive and the client commitment together will obviously be much stronger. And I think it's going to come at that local level. I don't think central government is going to really support us for the next number of years while they're distracted with other things at the moment.
From some of the work that we've done, we know central government is interested in circular economy, just like the EU is interested and has issued a package of information on that. But as I sort of mentioned, they need to make their policies based on evidence, and they expect that if this is such a promising commercial opportunity and the way that it's been framed and the analysis suggests, then they expect a little bit of leadership, I think, from those cross-sector collaborations to sort of start to generate a bit of momentum and evidence of the benefits first before they come in heavy on a sort of sector-wide regulation or something. So I think that's baby steps.
Okay, thank you. You've picked up on the subject of leadership, and I think John talked about the need for clients to build their own or grab their own agenda and to see the benefit of it, and then to buy into it and create a critical mass. So if I could augment the question by saying, how do you think we can get clients to understand the benefit, to overcome perhaps some of the economic considerations for the wider sustainability and closed loop considerations? How can we get them to see the goal that they could actually score? Duncan?
I think some clients are already doing that. I mean, I was in Amsterdam in November and looking at a building called the Circle Pavilion, and it was funded by the AMRO of the Netherlands Bank. And the client there stood there and said, we're a financial bank, but we're also a materials bank, completely getting the concept and putting their money where their mouth is with this amazing pavilion, where the insulation for this pavilion, by the way, 18 million euros, I think, was made out of genes from employees, old genes. So they're completely getting the concept and seeing the value in it. So, and I have to say, there's a little hotspot in Amsterdam. I mean, Amsterdam's pledging to be pretty much zero waste by 2030, I think, or 2025, and the Netherlands by 2030. So it's going to be city-states, I think, that are going to lead the way, not central government.
Okay, John, for a quick word.
Just to say, it's not either or, actually. It's not going against the economic interests of the clients. It's finding those clients whose economic interests align with having reusable buildings. So where you want to change them in a retail environment very quickly, or you want to be able to redeploy things over time, then you're in their interest and it saves you money. The Segro building, 25% cheaper. So we've got to find, it's that horses for courses bit. Find those where it does work, use that to drive change in the market. The others, still build, long life, loose fit. Don't try and force them to do things against the market. You'll never beat the market. It's not going to happen.
I think we've all got a duty to perhaps share the good word and to publicise when it is done well. Charlie, quickly.
I think just leading on from that, it's talking to the client about the what do they actually want from their building. Do they actually want to own that building in a lot of cases? And many, if you look at a commercial client letting out an office, it's not the structure that they want, it's the space inside it that's important to them. So the structure, and whether it's the concrete frame, the steel frame, the cladding on the outside, they don't necessarily want to own that, because over the life of that building, that turns from an asset into a liability, and it costs them money to take that down. So if they can get either the owner of that or the supplier of that material to maintain ownership of it, or it goes into a general commodities market that someone owns, it means they haven't got that liability on their balance sheet. And that's something we need to get across as well to some of these commercial property owners.
Okay, thank you. We're very much approaching the end of the time that we're allocated. Anybody want to have one last quick question or observation that you want to share with everybody else? Thank you. Go on. Well, we'll make this, down here please, we'll make this the lady in yellow, or mustard. We'll make this the last question.
Hi, Anna Surgener from UK Green Building Council. I suppose I'm interested in what the future role is of the designer and contractor. Talking like 2050, will they be the same as what they are doing today?
Everybody talked about design, so Richard, you want to go first?
I mean, 2050 is quite far away, and Stuart Brand, who's one of the architects behind circular economy, said that all buildings are predictions, and all predictions are wrong. So I might take his cautionary advice and not go. I think that we talked about fragmentation, and we talked about collaboration, and I think there needs to be a bit more integration and vertical integration between designers, contractors, suppliers, clients, to sort of really deliver complete solutions that provide what clients really want, which is space, not material. And if we can sort of deliver a much tighter, more unified product to the market that has a wider application rather than designing prototypes over and over again, I think we might be getting somewhere.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to top things off? And
I'd tend to agree that we can't make too many predictions, but I think change is inevitable. That we need to change the model. It doesn't work at the moment, and there needs to be there needs to be a lot more collaboration across. At the moment it's a very linear process. Building's a very linear process in itself. We need to make that a lot more of a collaborative process. Working a lot closer together with the client, the designers and the contractors and the supply chain, because they are the specialists in their own materials. You look at, we've got material suppliers on the stage here as well. They are the experts in their materials. We need to be bringing them on board a lot earlier than we do at the moment.
Thank you. In the name of equality, I'll give everybody a chance to answer the last question. You seem to have animated the four of them, so Duncan, along to you. Okay. Quick 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think the circular economy won't happen without trust, and it won't happen without information and knowledge as well. So I think our designers are going to have to be better informed than they are at the moment, actually, about the places that they're working, the buildings they're working with, because most of the time you're working with existing situations. But I do actually think, as quoting a colleague that wrote a book, he said that we're in a situation now where if you ask your design team if the greener version of what you want is going to cost more and they say yes, tell them to try harder. If they can't, find a team that can. I think the thing that you've got with people coming here in this room, you've got the team that can.
Thank you. And John, for the final word.
Okay, so very, very quickly. some portion of the market, I think, will be building buildings almost like Meccano or Lego. And just to kind of reiterate the point about fools and making predictions, I've used that example before, and then I saw in the paper today that Lego bricks, they're now making their trees out of biodegradable materials. So Lego trees are no longer plastic. And who would have predicted that, 7 years ago? So I'm going to leave you with biodegradable plastic Lego trees.
I think I'll leave you with the final statement, and I can't claim it as my own, but it has been said, necessity is the mother of invention. So on that note, I'd like to ask you to thank the panel for their presentations and for their questions. Thank you.